Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. We have very exciting guest today, very popular and single-minded focus on one leader of India, which is very much respected by most of the Indians, and also he's a subject of study in many U.S. universities. So we will find out more about his character, who he is, and how he shaped the destiny of India. So it's a great historical lesson for all of you because this gentleman has done detailed studies on his character, life, appearance, disappearance, many aspects. One show might not be enough for this topic, so we'll talk to him again later on if he agrees to come on. So without delay, let us welcome Sri Anuj Dhar.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you very much.
So Anuj, how did you develop the fascination for Sri Subhash Chandra Bose?
My story is a bit unusual. My grandfather was part of the British Indian Army, and he happened to fight against Subhash Bose. So, as you know, in Second World War, Subhash Bose decided to go and join the exercise because the Allied side was not willing to concede India, give India. They were not in favor of India becoming free. Churchill had uh, dug his heels in, and despite the American pressure, he was not willing to, give India freedom. So Subhash Bose had no other option but to go and seek help from the exercise, which he got. So my grandfather was part of the British Indian Army, and he happened to fight against Subhash Bose when he joined the Japanese side, and they made it in. So that's what link I always grew up with, and I never saw my grandfather, but only I had his medals. I still have them, but I heard about the stories of what really happened those. So from my own family folklore, my own family lore, I knew one thing from day one. India's becoming free has to do with Subhash Bose, not with Mahatma Gandhi, as it is presumed by a lot of people. So because I came to know from my own family elders that my grandfather would tell them that when they went and they fought with the Japanese and the INA, with the army which Subhash was leading. So there was a virtual revolt in the armed forces of India. And British Empire was essentially controlled by the Great Britain, not only in India but outside India, using the same armed forces. So the number of Britishers in India, even at the height of the British Empire, were not more than 5,000-6,000. So it was essentially Indians who were controlling the British Empire for the British. And among those Indians, the most important component was the British Indian Army, the largest volunteer army in the world in those days. So this army began to go against the British. So that is a main reason, security, strategical reason they uh, left India. So this is something which I knew from my own family history. So that was my interest. Then, of course, in India, as you have in America, you have very, many conspiracy theories, etc. About, for example, John F. Kennedy's case is very well known. Kennedy's, what happened in Dallas in 1963 has spawned so many conspiracy theories, and people till date, I think probably last year, some papers were released by even this current president of yours. So in India also, like as you have in America, John F. Kennedy case, in India, the Subhash Bose death history is very well known. There's not even single Indian or anybody of Indian origin who has not heard of it. When we were very young, we were kids, so we used to think about. We used to, like everybody else, used to talk about strange things. For example, UFOs. We used to talk about Atlantis mystery and so on and so forth. But in India, this was also part of that myth that children grew up with. There was always this rumor and controversy and claims and counterclaims that what really happened to Subhash Bose. Officially speaking, Subhash Chandra Bose died in a plane crash in Taiwan soon after the war, Second World War. But unofficially, there are multiple theories. So one of which was very well known, and it is you can say that it is India's number one conspiracy theory, and that is to the effect that Subhash did not die in any plane crash. He was alive after his reported death. He moved to Russia where he was captured by the Russians, and Russians then used the Subhash Bose as a bargaining chip with the Indians. And India, which was part of the Allied bloc, we were firmly with the Allies. Mahatma Gandhi was supporting the Allied side. Panditji was technically on the British side. So, but there was sudden turnaround in India's foreign policy, and we became part of the Russian bloc. So there is a controversy, and there's a lot of people claim they make these kind of comments, which we heard growing up. When I was growing up, that India's friendship towards Russia basically because of the fact that they had the main person with them under their custody, and through which they could, you know, blackmail somebody in India, so on and so forth. So this was the environment in which I grew up, and Subhash is always there, as you said. It's not as everybody in India knows about him, but my particular interest about him was because of my grandfather's link, and the story that I heard when I was growing up.
A great viewpoint, because sometimes we are guided by who we are based on our ancestors, and I think that's a great motivation. Now, coming back to then the Subhash Chandra Bose, you mentioned about World War I, World War II. Most of the Americans are not, especially students, are not aware. This is not being taught. What was India's contribution to these world wars, so they can gauge some idea about who is Subhash Chandra Bose, number one.
We had no contribution. We were under the British rule, so we had no contribution. India was to become free.
Uh,
So what we have is a thing called British Indian Army, which unfortunately the government of India today, Tom Toms as a army which goes around different parts of the world and freeing people. No, you couldn't have done that thing because we were a slave country. We were not free. Our India's national interest in 10s or 20s, 30s, 40s was one and same. You had to get rid of the British first. So we had a lot of people who had become part of the British Indian Army, and British were using British Indian Army to control not only India but other colonies like Hong Kong. So Indians had no contribution in Second First World War. They were cannon fodder, we could say that in that sense. So there were people in the British Indian Army who went and fought against Germans. My grandfather fought against Germans. My uncle fought against Germans. The two uncle of mine fought against Germans. So my grandfather was in Africa. He was in, of course, Kohima, where he fought the Japanese. But he was not fighting for his country. He was fighting for the British Raj. So today we have but surely my government today, Indian government, for whatever reason, for reason of diplomacy, they tom as if like Indians were going and fighting for the. This morning only I tweeted about something. Somebody in Canada was tweeting that Indians were there fighting for the no, they were not fighting. We were not free country. They were mercenaries. They were getting paid for it, and they were sustaining the British Raj. They were not fighting for any country. So I don't see any point in making this claim that India made any contribution to the war. We did not.
now,
We were not a free country.
no, nicely put. So now, coming back to this, in the war, most of the Americans, their view of India is yogis and meditation, very peaceful
Yeah.
people, and generally that is the conception about Indians is. So an Indian taking up an arms against the British Empire is never heard, no, never taught in the universities. What is your view on that?
No, because we had this 1857 revolt, and after 1857 revolt, Indians were put down in such a brutal manner. They lost the guts to look in the eye of the white man. So 1857 was the period when Indians were run down like anything, and they didn't have the guts to take up weapons against they couldn't even think of getting into a confrontation with the white man and win the war. In fact, the two things which changed Indian mind, and the second was more important when Japanese defeated the British in Second World War in Singapore, and the manner which they were defeated. That turned the tide in our favor. Then suddenly people begin to realize, yes, you can defeat the white man. Otherwise, Indians in those days were not capable of thinking along those lines. We were too much scared of the British. British were the peak of their power, and so it is only after the fall of Singapore that things began to change for India. In fact, that's the point Subhash Bose became active. But you're right about like Americans thinking of India mostly as a people who are into spiritual things. Even Subhash Bose had that kind of impression on American mind to an extent. When he was in Germany, he first went to Germany in 1930s. So right from very please, people tend to divide things. They see things black and white. Nazi Germany must be something very negative, and but it so happened that every country in the world was pursuing their own national interest. So right from the First World War, even before that, Japan and Germany were trying to pursue their interest in India. So both Japan and Germany were supporting Indian freedom struggle to an extent, even before Second World War happened, even before Hitler came in the picture. So Subhash was in Germany after the Nazi Party came to power in 1930s, but he was aware of what's happening there. Very interesting story there that he met a Jewish couple, Kitty and Alex, in Berlin, and he told them leave this country. It's not safe for you. Go back. Move to some other country. Kitty and Alex moved to America, and I believe Alex died in Connecticut probably a couple of years back. He must have been 90 something, when he died. But Kitty wrote a book about Subhash Bose, Subhash Chandra Bose as I knew him. So this book was published in 1965. In this book, she talks about of Subhash Bose essentially as a spiritual person. That I met him in Germany. He used to talk about India's spiritual background and all the good things which India can teach to the West, so on and so forth. So even Subhash Bose carries a lot of spiritual, in fact, so a lot of people take interest in him because of that reason also. So there's a spiritual link, but at the same time, Indians were not uh, did not have the guts to fight, take up arms against the British. That is one reason why Gandhiji had to adopt the non-violent moves, because people didn't know how to fight, because they'd forgotten. And in fact, after the 1857 revolt, the manner in which they were suppressed, they were put down, people had lost all the will to fight the British. It is only Subhash Bose who revived that during the course of the war.
I think that's the biggest contribution also to giving the pride back to somehow the back to Indians. Somehow the world revolves around brute strength more than the philosophical strength. So the brute strength dictates the philosophical strength. And when the international diplomacy is all about in Hindi call it bahubal, military power. There is nothing else works there,
Yes,
and somehow the
yes.
people have developed. That's why in the history of India, and that's why Subhash Chandra Bose example stands out, that without having the military upper hand, you cannot negotiate with any of these big powers anyway. It's not possible. So this misconception about we can negotiate our way out of a trouble is a big problem for a country, because countries can you cannot negotiate a way out from any situation. Just like in USA, it's the first the air force speaks, then the ground troops speak, and then the diplomacy speaks. But in case of India, it's first the diplomacy speaks, and it speaks and it speaks and it speaks. There's no other
No, but
second.
India also, if you remember, after 1947, the problem, we are very hypocritical people. We tend to talk so much about Mahatma Gandhi, but we don't follow him actually. Government of India does not follow Mahatma Gandhi. We have our second largest standing army in the world. We have our intelligence bureau. We have our RAW, like your FBI and CIA. So we use the same methodology which you do. And after the India became free in 47, we have used our army everywhere. So even against our own people. So that's we do all the time. So this is one thing to claim, because one problem with India, that India's leadership was hankering for Nobel Peace Prize, because they thought probably, maybe getting a Nobel Peace Prize probably would the biggest thing they could get. So it is fashionable in India, for example, to talk about Mahatma Gandhi and peace, but tactical terms nobody follows. You would recall couple of days, probably 2 3 months back, our defense minister of India, he made a statement publicly that India is going to follow the path of Mahatma Gandhi for all the time to come. Now, today you see images. He's holding a machine gun like Rambo. So on one hand, you are behaving like John Rambo. On the other hand, you're talking about so India is very people are very smart. They keep giving these kind of conflicting things. So they keep talking about peace and non-violence, but the government of India does not follow the non-violence and peace of Mahatma Gandhi. Which if we do, we will be finished as a country. If you follow the path shown by Mahatma Gandhi, India will not remain a free country for the next 5 years. We'll be finished. If Mahatma Gandhi was completely unpractical person, he talked about maybe he should have remained. He's good as a Mahatma, but as a political leader, he was a complete failure,
Yeah,
because none of his, most of his, things that he has said are not practical.
so Winston Churchill had a good quote on Mahatma Gandhi. He said either he is a politician or he's a mendicant, like something like that. He said. Now coming back to this, the phenomenon of, I call it a phenomenon of Subhash Chandra Bose, because many of us, I have been very inspired by him, and to see you here talk is giving me unbound pleasure right now. So in Subhash Chandra Bose, he brought, like you said, he brought a new dimension, a new way of thinking, and I think he energized a lot of Indians. So one thing it comes from your conversation is that he was a keen observer of international politics of that times. So he studied Singapore, and he did meet Germans like Hitler. He met, and he did meet other people to bring back the pride in the Indian community. He knew that the strength he needs to defy British, because they were very brutal in the past. So what are the lessons that he taught in this regard, in a way of strategic outreach?
I think the biggest lesson that the way Subhash Bose harnessed the power of Indians abroad, that is something remarkable.
Mm.
Again, my pet peeve again, that if you sit in New Delhi and you look into, you would, the government of India keeps on branding it as Mahatma Gandhi who actually, harnessed the power of Indians abroad. But unfortunately, he failed. He did not harness any power. It was here only Subhash Chandra Bose who went out. He was first in Germany. He raised an army and he, did some damage. And then, of course, he was in Southeast Asia. Of course, with the help of Japanese, he raised another. He was the army was already there, but he took charge of it. And thereafter, he was actually able to deliver a big blow, which is now you see in the all declassified files. So it's today's, there is no dispute. If you pick up any good book about Subhash Bose written by historians, be it Americans or even British, they all agree with one thing very clearly: India's becoming free has to do with him, not with the other things which are being taught as a matter of propaganda by my own government here.
Yeah, Mountbatten Attlee was asked by the nephew or niece of Subhash Chandra Bose that what was the contribution of
No, but,
Mahatma
huh, but
Gandhi?
that is a hearsay. I mean, I don't go into hearsay. There are clear-cut documents from that era, from the intelligence side, from the highest level of military, from the level of the viceroy. So we have a very clear-cut, documentation which makes it very clear why and how the British left. Now, coming to Clement Attlee, this very interesting anecdote which most people know, but let me repeat to you. Clement Attlee was a prime minister of England. He was the one who decided to set India free. He was a decision maker. He was a prime minister. Mr. Attlee came to India in 56. That is almost 10 years after he was no longer the Prime Minister of England. And he happened to visit, and he was there in Lucknow. He comes to Delhi, then he goes to Calcutta. In Calcutta, he's met by then Chief Justice of the Calcutta High Court, and this gentleman was then acting governor of the state as well. So he hosted the visitor in the sprawling bungalow of the governor. And there at night, at dinner, he asked him this question: "Look, Second World War ended your way. You won the war, and there was no pressing reason for you to leave the country in 45. When you sorry you won the war in 45, there was no pressing reason for you to quit India next 2 years. You decided in 46. What made you leave so quickly?" So then, of course, Clement Attlee agreed it was because of the problem in the armed forces. That's why they left. And additional point which was raised by Justice Chakraborty was what was the impact of Mahatma Gandhi's all that movement that he had started. He said minimal. We were not troubled by it. So that's known thing. And then of course later on, after 10 years, Mr. Attlee was in Oxford, England. He was met by eminent historians from India who were otherwise not very supportive of Subhash Bose. But even to them, he would tell the same story. And then now, likewise, we have got multiple documentation which have become available from that time, and even commentaries made by people who knew better. They all agree, and the whole thing converges on the same point: that India's becoming free has to do with the fact that the British were controlling this country using our armed forces, and our armed forces turned against them because of Subhash Bose. So that is the main reason for them to leave India. This entire story of India becoming free because of non-violence is a fiction which was planted to show the British and some Indian leaders in good light.
It's a big mythology. Big mythology.
It's a fiction. It's the biggest mythology of India because that is what the fight is all about. The good thing about this mythology, for example, it's sellable in the Western countries, especially in
Correct.
your country.
Yeah.
So you go to New York, you'll see Mahatma Gandhi's statue. You go to England, you'll see statues everywhere. Because the whole idea of Mahatma Gandhi, if you see that movie called Attenborough's film 1984 movie Gandhi, Ben Kingsley, most of you would not be aware. The movie was funded by government of India. It's a propaganda film. My government funded it. It's a funded movie by the government of India. It shows the Mahatma Gandhi's life as would be seen by government of India. For example, the entire 3 hour long movie, there's not even a single scene on Subhash Bose. Subhash Bose was the only political leader who gave Gandhi a run for his money. So you cannot talk about Gandhi's life not referring to Subhash Bose even once. So that entire propaganda, and then many multiple problem, things which are not correct, which were shown in the film. But at the same time, the movie does give you an impression that Gandhi was a great man. I'm not disputing that. Gandhiji's greatness is not in dispute. So that's not my point. But it does give you an impression that Gandhi and the British were very nice people both. One said, leave the country, and the other said, okay, I'm leaving. So this whole fiction, portrays the British and Gandhi in good light. That is why acceptable to both London and Delhi. And once it became acceptable in the in London, and then probably the myth crossed over to across Atlantic and became well known in America, where people have no idea what Indians were dealing with.
So in one of the things about the American psyche is, if you look at the American history channels, they never show America losing a war. Never. If you look at the British history channels, they'll never show Britain losing a war. and they try to promote all. See, if they're promoting someone, that means there is an ulterior motive. They don't want to show their race as being losing to anyone else in any situation, any situation. Now, even against the Japanese, people, Americans don't know that Japanese sank up to 750 American submarines in the Pacific. Up to 750. That's a number which is not disclosed generally. Also, the Vietnam stories where the northern Vietnamese defeated southern Vietnamese despite American overwhelming military presence. That is also not discussed here. Now, that is a fact, and that's where I could totally corroborate what you say, because that's an American psyche to keep one upmanship on the military side on the opposition, and that's why they're never going to discuss about Subhash Chandra Bose, and that's how talk becomes very important
For
here.
Americans to not to discuss Subhash Bose is very perfectly understandable. They were not in touch with him. He unfortunately Subhash Bose visited many countries in Europe. He was in England for many years also, but he was never allowed to visit America. So unfortunately for Subhash Bose, he could never visit America. He could not maintain contacts with people. Otherwise, some of the best biographies of Subhash Bose are written by American historians.
Correct.
So the problem is that people are not aware. So I mean, if you recall, you have been in America for 23 years. Back in 80s, before the IT revolution happened, most of the Americans about India knew only two things: curry and Gandhi.
Correct.
So in general, they know nothing about our country. So for them to know about Subhash Bose doesn't make any sense. And the problem with Subhash Chandra Bose is that he joined the Axis side, and again, he was on your enemy's side. So you have no reason to be very happy with him, so on and so forth. So I think that's pretty justified for Americans not to know about Subhash Bose is perfectly okay. He doesn't fit in their scheme of things. He was never in the picture as far as they're concerned, and he unfortunately never visited America. So I don't hold it against Americans that do not know about Subhash Bose. That's perfectly understandable.
So in the one of the closest associates of Subhash Chandra Bose was a Muslim gentleman, one of the persons who was close to him. Is that a right story? Like, is that a right?
No, Subhash Chandra Bose was the president of Indian National Congress. He was a very big leader. So there were different people who were very close to him at different points in time. So usually you cannot say that there was only one person close to Modi ji, or the current Prime Minister of India, all the time. Today it could be Amit Shah, probably 10 years back was somebody else. So Subhash Bose had many people who was very close to him. He was dealing with all kind of people. He had good equation with so many people in the world. So he knew everybody. He also met by the Clement Attlee when he was a Labour Party minister. So Subhash was a proper leader. So he was close to a lot of people. It's not just one person, but then
So in the beginning, you touched upon in the first question, you touched upon a little bit his disappearance, and that
yeah.
has been a big. And I want to call you for that session separately because I want to discuss
Actually,
that.
my area of research, field research is a death mystery only. I
Yes.
usually don't deal with his life and times. I would call myself still a layman about his life and times. My focus, my area of research is the death mystery.
Yeah, I want to cover that in the next 2 3 sessions because I just today my audience wants to see you and they want to see because you're a writer and for viewers who are not familiar with him, Anuj, and the last name is Dhar. Search on Amazon, you'll find his books over there, and also search him on YouTube as well. You'll find his lot of videos and interviews also at the other places. Now, one of the things which because our channel caters to the youth mostly, Indian and as well as American mostly. So Subhash Chandra Bose, may not be area of expertise, but since you've written a book, you have some idea more than me at least. And so in Subhash Chandra Bose character and personality and his strength of like determination, how does it inspire youth today? In what ways it can inspire youth today?
He's already, I think, one of the most loved leaders of India. If you go around universities and talk to people, so despite all that the government of India has done to keep him, out of the picture, he remains one of the most famous leaders of our country, and it's mostly youth. I mean, I also when I go out and give my lectures, it's usually the young people who come and listen to me. And on social media also, I'm essentially engaging with younger people. So that's it. People like his. He was a young person. Many people think of him as a contemporary of Gandhi. He was not. He was probably 30 years younger than Mahatma Gandhi. So he was not a contemporary. He was a much younger person. So he was a youth leader. He died at a very young age. He died at the age of 47, 48. So he is there forever fixed in our memory as a young person, young leader. So his appeal is primarily is in among the young people of the country.
Hmm. So is it true that he assembled an army of deserters, British army deserters, Indian soldiers who deserted British army?
But he did not like the army was there when he was in. He first went to Germany to seek help. When he left the country in 1941. The situation was such that the British were not willing to set India free. They were talking about defeating the Nazis and fascists in the name of freedom and democracy, but they were not willing to grant India the freedom. So Subhash Bose, of course, went out. He escaped from India. He was under prison here. He was under put under house arrest by the British government. So he left his country. He wanted to go to Russia first. So his intention was to, because by that time Russia and Germany had not gone, they were not at war with each other. They were having some treaty. So essentially, his idea was he will take the help from Russian side and the German side, and then try to do something from that part of the world. But when he reached Germany, by this Germany had attacked Russia, and the relationship between Germany and Russia soured. So he was not in a position to carry out those plans. But at the same time, he started try to do some activity in Germany. Eventually, met Hitler after a wait of 1 year. Then he was sent to Southeast Asia to the Japanese. And Japanese had, by this time, gotten hold of around 70,000 POWs from the British side, Indians, mostly Indians. So they were converted into an army of India's liberation. And Subhash took charge of that army in 1943 when he came to Southeast Asia in 43. So yes, he led an army of independence which was formed by POWs from the British Indian Army.
And the British, when they attacked India from the east through Kohima, is that the first war happened between them and the
So
British,
that
or?
is where, unfortunately, for Subhash Bose, by the time he reached Japan, Southeast Asia, the timing was not correct. He was in Germany, and Germans took some time to decide to send him to Southeast Asia. By the time he reached this sector of the war, things had turned against the Axis powers. So in 42, when Subhash Bose left the country in 41, if he had gone to Japan straight away, or probably had reached in 42, things would have been much more easier for him. But by the time he reached this part of the world in 43, the Axis forces were losing the war. So Japan was already on the decline, so it was not much they could do other than waging a psychological warfare, which is what he did.
So, Anuj, one last question on this session, but I would like to call you again to discuss the disappearance of Subhash Chandra Bose. Now, during this time, uh, the Russia was, you just said, it was not at war openly still till now, until the German Sixth Army attacked Petersburg, and then the things started reversing. So, what was the reason that he approached Germany first, and what was and then Japan?
He went to. I mean, it depends where he could go. So he escaped India from Afghanistan. Afghanistan was very close borders next to India. You can actually walk, go across Afghanistan and get into Russian territory. Easier. You can walk into Europe from India. But going towards Japan is not possible. You have to cross the sea. So probably that route was better. He had his connection in that part of the world. So he did was is to go to Afghanistan. He crossed over from Afghanistan to Russian side. Italians helped him there, gave him fake, a fake passport and some other identity was he was given, and then from there he Russians helped him to reach Germany. So he took help from everybody to um, meet his objectives.
So this is really fascinating story, that how he did in a different way than Gandhi, and he was the president of Congress, Indian National Congress, right, at that time.
No, a sort of adventure you will not hear from anybody from India could even think of in those days. In fact, his escape in 1941 when he escaped from Calcutta and he reached Germany, that I think to my mind one of the three greatest escape of Indian history. The first was in the ancient period when Chandragupta Maurya, he was imprisoned by Alexander, and Chandragupta somehow escaped from his camp. So that must be a very big deal, from Chandragupta to young Chandragupta to escape from Alexander's, camp just like that. The second was, of course, Chhatrapati Shivaji, when he escaped from the Agra fort. It's an incredible thing. Somebody should make a movie out of it. And the third way, the way Subhash Bose escaped, and it's not a simple thing for him to, I mean, from Calcutta to reach Kabul, and from Kabul hide there, and you have all kind of spies looking for you. And from Kabul he reached, from with the Italian help he reached Germany, negotiated with these people, It's an incredible thing for an Indian. In fact, if you go on internet and look for, just Google Subhash Bose's photograph in Germany and other places, you'll find that even in those days when India's clout was virtually nothing in the world, and Subhash was just a refugee in that country, just observe his body language, the way he dealt with the people at the highest level. That's remarkable. I mean, I feel very proud. I saw the minutes of his discussion with Hitler. When he spoke to Hitler, he spoke with so much of confidence. That's mind-boggling for a man to have so much of courage and intellect, and to be able to go to that country and seek help, and the others obliged. It's incredible.
No, I think the his conversations with Hitler, I've read it on the Google, and they're remarkable. Like the depth of conversation and the time that Hitler spent with him also was a long. I think it is one and a
Nobody
half.
knows exactly what he probably had more than two, three meetings. So, but we know of only one meeting. So, the one meeting, the minutes are available in which they discuss many issues. And one thing is very remarkable because in Mein Kampf, the book Hitler wrote, he made some comment about Indians that they cannot fight, so they are better off under the British. So he told him, "Look, you have written this thing, and this is being used against us, so you might as well remove this part." So he had the courage to tell this thing to Hitler on his face, and I'm given to understand it was removed from the subsequent editions. Now contrast this thing with the attitude Winston Churchill had against India. He used abusive words for Hindus. He talked nonsense about us all the time, and he was generally not very uncouth kind of person. But nobody from India, after we became free, ever had the guts to talk to him and tell him, "Look, you owe us an apology." In fact, the only interest the Indian, you would know better than me, the Indian elite class, the only interest they had was to settle their children in England and America. So they were not bothered. Nehru never asked, Churchill for an apology. In fact, when Churchill died, the person who now we say was, as far as we are concerned, he was worse than Hitler, because Hitler killed a lot of Jews, but Churchill killed Indians. So I am more concerned with my own country than what happened in Europe. So we never asked for an apology. In fact, when he died, we lowered our flag and we also cried. So this is a very shameful thing conduct on the part of my government, the way they have genuflected before these people even after independence, because the interest of the Indian elite class, the Indian ruling class, was always to settle their children in Europe and America. That is the main agenda on which they were working, and they're still working.
It's still there. That mindset is still there, and
So
sometimes
that is the basic agenda. That is why they keep this whole fiction of Mahatma Gandhi, is surviving in India, because the ruling elite supports it, because the ruling elite gives the same argument to the political class. Okay, this theory of Gandhi is very sellable in America and sellable in Europe. Subhash Bose is not sellable in America. But my problem, I'm living in India. I will think of my country's national interest first. I am concerned with America. I'm concerned with Europe. The world is one. But then primarily I will think of my country's national interest first. But these people, because they all of them have families settled down in those countries. There's nothing wrong in that, by the way. I have so many friends who are Americans and British, but then I am not going to change I'm not going to disown my history. I'm not going to disown my ancestors if I become part of America. If you're an American, you are under no obligation. Americans don't ask you to disown your Hindu religion. They were not asked to disown your ancestors. You become part of one country, you can, of course, your loyalty goes to that country, but then you will not disown your past.
absolutely,
So you
absolutely,
should not become Bobby Jindal that I don't know, have no link with India. No, you have all the link with India. Your parents were born here. When Bobby Jindal can see movies about Amitabh Bachchan, I'm sure he's aware of Subhash Chandra Bose. Subhash Chandra Bose is not a small fry.
yes,
I'm sure Kamala Harris would be knowing so many things about him. Her family is from Chennai. 50% of people from Tamil Nadu were there in Subhash Bose's army. Every Indian worth his name, anybody who has had an Indian grandfather or great grandfather would know about Subhash Bose. He's very famous here.
the times are changing now. Most of the people now they are aware of the real history because thanks to internet right now and social
Yes.
media. And so more awareness is there now, and people
If it
are
wasn't for social media, I wouldn't be talking to you. You think anybody would let somebody like me talk like this? You couldn't criticize Mahatma Gandhi in early in our country. You
exactly.
couldn't, put forward your views. So power and knowledge was limited to only handful of people in the elite class. Only those who would go to the universities abroad, only they could read books, only they could see documents. Now I can download and see the CIA records on my website. I don't need to go to the Maryland, the archives in America.
correct.
So the same information is available to me as well. And also Indians are from the middle class are now going everywhere. They are able to see things, they can judge things on their own. But things are completely different in the older days, and the way the Indian elite class have run the show, that's pretty shameful as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the narrative building is ideological warfare, and that has
Yes,
gone on for such a long time, especially to defang the Hindus. Just like the way Hitler considered Indians as not fight worthy, and Winston Churchill, I call him the bulldog of UK. So he made a comment that Indians are like insects and rats. They breed like insects and rats,
yes,
and they need to be exterminated. And the Bengal famine was a result of that.
yeah,
Now the history is being told, and this was also one of our attempts. Also, is to to bring forth the Sattology, not the mythology.
yeah.
Uh, my last question for this event, and probably invite you at least for the couple of more rounds for the disappearance of Netaji. So the word Netaji, when was it given to him, or what was the reason for
See,
that?
no, no, Neta is a very common Indian, Hindi name. It's called leader,
Hmm.
probably like this. So this was most likely given in, Nazi Germany. So when Subhash was there, he formed like some kind of an army raised there. So he had to. So he took some decision. He settled on Indian national salutation, Jai Hind. Otherwise, people used to use, they would use, some religious, salutations in India. So because Subhash's idea was to unify people, make them as one, put up one joint front against the British. Because our main national interest in those days was to get rid of the colonial rule on India. So he came up with the idea of one national anthem, which is Jana Gana Mana, which we have adopted because Indians couldn't think along those lines. He came up with the national salutation, Jai Hind. It has become our salutation. In fact, when President Obama came to India, he opened his talk with Jai Hind. So I'm sure he must have been informed, the American president, the Jai Hind was adopted as Indian salutation in Nazi Germany. And then same way, he was given the title of Netaji there because that is the way you address a respected leader. G, as you know, is a very common, you know, way of giving respect to anybody. I can put a G after your name. So Neta means leader and
Not
G
in
means
Japanese.
respect.
Japanese Jimin is an old man.
San, they call San. Japanese they use San word, so they put San after everything. Whoever you want to show respect to. So
Correct.
in India, you put G. So you, for example, you don't say Modi, you say Modi G.
Hmm.
I would. You can't say Donald. I mean, in India, to call somebody who's maybe much more older than you are and probably is a very eminent person, you cannot call him by his first name because that's very insulting, in fact. So if I were to see Donald in Indian setting, I will call him Donald G.
Hmm.
So I cannot call him by his first name. That he's much more older than he's my father's age. I cannot talk to him by, taking his first name. So G is a very well-known, suffix in India. You use it for to show respect. So that's and it clicked. Everything he did in Germany clicked instantly. That Netaji became very well known. That and this Jai Hind became so well known that it was adopted by the Indian government as a salutation. And the same Indian army which fought against Subhash Bose's army eventually has taken up Jai Hind as its own slogan now. So that is his moral victory.
Absolutely. I think the imprints of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose giving confidence back to Hindus. And I think today, most of the armies of the world, they consider Indian soldiers as one of the best. So I think that also image change has gone into a large extent. And so coming, we'll talk more on these topics, Anuji. And for the viewers, if you have any questions, please ask on the YouTube video that goes down. Some of you have watched it live, watch it again on YouTube and do comment over there with any questions you have. Meanwhile, you can go to Amazon and search for Anuj Dhar, Anujdhar, and search his books over there and support his mission. And with that, we'll end the show here on this one. Anuji, if
Thank you very much for having me here, and I look forward to the second session, and which is about my area of research. But anyhow, good to touch base with you. I'm new to this medium. I told you that I was not very still not very comfortable. So, but still, in the corona, the pandemic is going on, so we'll have to do with whatever we have right now.
yes, yes.
And I look forward to meeting you somewhere in San Diego probably in the near future.
Yes, absolutely. You're very welcome. You come to San Diego and I take you all over the country.
Thank
So,
you so much.
so thank you viewers for watching it and see you again in the next show. Namaskar.